The eyes in the darkness weren't there when I first checked the bedroom closet. I know this because I've developed a habit of scanning every corner of my new apartment before settling in for the night, a precaution that began after moving to this remote countryside property 3 months ago. Tonight, however, as I reached to turn off the bedside lamp, something urged me to look back at the closet once more, and there they were, 2 faint yellowish orbs hovering in the gap between the partially closed doors. I froze, my breath catching in my throat as I stared, unable to convince myself it was just a reflection. The rational part of my brain immediately suggested it must be light bouncing off something metallic, a coat hanger perhaps, or the zipper of a hanging jacket. But the primal part knew better. Those eyes were watching me with an intelligence that made my skin ripple with goosebumps. They blinked slowly and deliberately, a millisecond of darkness that confirmed my worst fears. "Hello?" I called out, my voice embarrassingly weak as it broke the midnight silence. No response came, not that I expected one. The eyes remained fixed on me, unmoving, unblinking now. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, never breaking eye contact with whatever lurked in my closet. The familiar weight of my device offered little comfort as I clutched it with trembling fingers, the screen's glow illuminating my face but failing to penetrate the shadows where the intruder hid. My apartment is on the 3rd floor. The windows were locked. The front door had been bolted and chained since I returned from work at 6. No one could have entered without my knowledge. Yet something was here, watching me with calculated patience. I considered my options. Call the police and sound like a lunatic. Confront whatever it was directly or simply run. None seemed particularly appealing. The faint sound of breathing reached my ears. Not my own ragged gasps, but something deeper, more controlled. It had a peculiar rhythm to it, almost like it was trying to synchronize with mine. In, out, in, out. With each breath, I felt a strange pressure building in the room, as if the air itself was becoming thicker, charged with anticipation. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees, and I could see my own breath forming misty clouds in the suddenly frigid bedroom. I decided to confront it. Swinging my legs off the bed, I stood on unsteady feet, never once breaking eye contact with the watching presence. "Whatever you are," I said with as much authority as I could muster, "get out of my home." The eyes didn't move, but I heard what sounded like a low, amused chuckle emanating from the darkness. It wasn't a human sound. It was too hollow, too resonant, as if coming from something with a chest cavity much larger than any person's. Taking a reluctant step forward, I felt something brush against my ankle, soft like hair or fur, but gone before I could look down. Another touch, this time on my shoulder, yet when I spun around, nothing was there. The eyes in the closet hadn't moved. They couldn't have touched me. With horrifying clarity, I realized that whatever was in my closet wasn't alone. The floorboards creaked behind me, not the natural settling of an old building, but the deliberate step of something substantial. I whirled around, my heart hammering against my ribs, but saw nothing in the dim light. When I turned back to the closet, the eyes had vanished. Somehow, this was more terrifying than their presence had been. Now I had no idea where it was watching from. A whisper curled into my ear, so close I could feel the warmth of breath. "We've been waiting for you to notice us." The voice was simultaneously ancient and childlike, a contradiction that sent waves of nausea through my body. "We've always been here, in the walls, in the corners you don't quite see. This was our home long before it was yours." My phone slipped from my sweat-slicked palm, clattering to the floor and plunging the room into darkness as the screen went black. In that moment of disorientation, I felt dozens of feather-light touches all over my body, on my arms, my neck, through my hair. I staggered backward until I hit the wall, a scream building in my throat that wouldn't come out. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I began to make out shapes moving across the ceiling, along the walls, flowing like liquid shadow. They had no definite form, just darkness deeper than the surrounding night, moving with purpose and awareness, and everywhere, pairs of eyes began to open, in the corners near the window, under the bed, all with the same yellowish glow I'd seen in the closet. I wasn't dealing with a single intruder. My apartment was infested with them. "What do you want?" I managed to gasp, pressing myself flat against the wall as the shadows converged around me, never quite touching but close enough that I could feel a strange electric tingle on my skin. The answer came not in words, but in images that flooded my mind. Flashes of myself sleeping while the creatures perched on my chest, feeding on my dreams. Memories of previous tenants who had also been watched, also been fed upon, until they either fled or simply disappeared. I realized with growing horror that I'd been sustaining them for months without knowing it. The unexplained fatigue, the nightmares that left me more exhausted than when I'd gone to sleep, the feeling of being perpetually drained. It hadn't been stress or the adjustment to rural living, as I'd told myself. They had been siphoning away pieces of my essence night after night, becoming bolder, stronger. "We need more now," the whispering voice explained, seeming to come from everywhere at once. Awareness increases our hunger, acknowledgement makes us real. The shadows rippled with what I can only describe as anticipation. "And now that you truly see us, we can finally feast properly." They descended on me all at once, a wave of cold, hungry darkness. I felt them pass through clothing, through skin, sinking into me like ice water, injected directly into my veins. My scream finally broke free, but it sounded distant, as if coming from someone else's throat. As consciousness began to fade, the last thing I saw were those yellow eyes, dozens of them, all around me, watching with ancient, patient hunger as they consumed what made me human. The police report would later note that the apartment was empty when they conducted their welfare check, with no signs of struggle or forced entry. My possessions remained. My car was still parked outside, but I had simply vanished. They'll never find me because I'm still here, or what's left of me is. Just another shadow in the corner, just another pair of eyes in the darkness, waiting for the next tenant to move in. If you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Your support helps bring more terrifying tales to life. The first recording arrived on Tuesday. A plain manila envelope with no return address slipped under my apartment door sometime during the night. Inside was a single cassette tape, labeled only with the date, yesterday's date, written in red marker. Curiosity got the better of caution, and after digging out my old Sony Walkman from a box of college memorabilia, I pressed play. What I heard turned my blood to ice, my own voice mumbling sleepily as I shuffled through my morning routine. "Coffee first, then shower," I heard myself say, followed by the familiar gurgle of my ancient coffee maker. Every word, every ambient sound from my apartment yesterday morning was captured with perfect clarity. Someone had been in my home while I slept. Someone had recorded me without my knowledge. I tore through my apartment, checking windows and doors, searching for hidden cameras or microphones, finding nothing but the growing certainty that my private space had been violated. Sleep came fitfully that night, broken by the slightest sounds. The refrigerator's hum, water running through pipes in the walls, the gentle settling of the building, each one sending me bolt upright, straining to hear footsteps or breathing that would betray an intruder's presence. The second envelope appeared the next morning, containing another cassette with that day's date. With trembling hands, I played it, hearing myself from just hours before. "Who's doing this? What do you want?" I had shouted into the empty apartment during my frantic search. The tape captured not just my words, but the escalating panic in my voice. the ragged edge of my breathing as I moved from room to room. Most disturbing was the clarity of the recording. It sounded as if the microphone had been moving with me, always maintaining the perfect distance to capture every nuance. Police were skeptical when I filed a report. No signs of forced entry, no evidence of surveillance equipment, and no fingerprints on the tapes or envelopes other than my own. They suggested a prank by friends or neighbors who might have access to my apartment, but their dismissive tones made it clear they thought I was either paranoid or seeking attention. Change your locks was their only advice as they left, leaving me alone with walls I no longer trusted. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat in the center of my living room, lights blazing, a kitchen knife clutched in one hand and my phone in the other, ready to document any evidence of intrusion. The silence of the apartment pressed against my ears with an almost physical weight, broken only by the occasional creaking of floorboards or the distant slamming of doors elsewhere in the building. Around 3 in the morning, when my vigilance began to waver, I heard it, a soft click followed by a mechanical whir, so quiet I might have missed it if I hadn't been listening so intently. "I know you're here," I announced to the empty room, my voice steadier than I felt. "Show yourself." Nothing changed, yet I couldn't shake the certainty that I was being observed, that somewhere in the darkness, mechanical eyes or ears were cataloging my every move, my every word. The feeling of exposure was overwhelming, like being stripped naked in a crowded room. My skin prickled with invisible scrutiny. Morning arrived with bloodshot eyes and frayed nerves, but no third envelope appeared. Had my all-night vigil disrupted whatever game was being played? A fragile hope built within me as I went through my morning routine, constantly checking over my shoulder, peering into corners and behind furniture. It wasn't until I returned from a quick trip to the corner store that I found it. Not an envelope this time, but a small package wrapped in brown paper sitting on my kitchen counter. Inside was a handheld tape recorder, much like the one I'd owned as a child, with a note taped to it. "Now it's your turn." A fresh tape was loaded inside, ready to record. I stared at the device, trying to understand the message, the sick invitation being extended. Was I supposed to record myself? To what end? I placed the recorder on the counter and backed away as if it might bite. For hours I circled it warily, unable to touch it, yet equally unable to dispose of it, drawn into whatever twisted game my unseen tormentor was playing. That night, lying in bed with every light in the apartment burning, I finally heard what I'd been dreading. Footsteps, not from the hallway outside or the apartment above, but inside my bedroom, approaching with deliberate slowness. I lay frozen, eyes squeezed shut, breath suspended in my lungs as the steps drew nearer. Something cold and metallic pressed against my cheek, and a voice, my voice, whispered from the darkness, "Time to record the truth." My eyes flew open to empty air, but the tape recorder sat on the pillow beside me, its red record button depressed, the spools turning silently. Scrambling from the bed, I crashed into my dresser, sending items clattering to the floor. My hands flew to my face, feeling for evidence of the cold touch I'd felt, finding nothing but my own clammy skin. Had I dreamed it, sleepwalked? The recorder continued its silent documentation, capturing my confusion, my fear. With shaking fingers, I rewound the tape and pressed play. At first, there was only the sound of my own breathing as I slept, then the rustle of bed sheets as I tossed and turned. After several minutes, I heard it, a second breathing pattern, slightly out of sync with my own. Someone had been in the room, standing over me, breathing in rhythm just slightly offset from mine. The recording continued, capturing the sound of footsteps approaching the bed, the very footsteps that had woken me. Then my own voice spoke, but I hadn't been the one to say the words. Time to record the truth. The voice was mine, perfectly replicating my tone, my inflection, even the slight rasp that enters my speech when I'm tired. But it wasn't me. It couldn't have been me. Yet there was no one else in the recording, no other presence except the breathing and my own borrowed voice. A theory, terrible in its implications, began to form in my mind. I rifled through my desk until I found an unused cassette, loaded it into the recorder, and pressed record. "My name is Daniel Mercer," I stated clearly, then listed personal details, my address, birth date, the names of my parents. I described the room I was sitting in, the clothes I was wearing, the weather outside my window. After 5 minutes of this self-documentation, I stopped the recording, rewound the tape, and listened. The tape was blank, not silent, truly blank, as if nothing had been recorded at all. I tried again with the same result. In growing desperation, I spoke into the recorder for a third time, practically shouting my existence into the unresponsive machine. Again, nothing was captured. It was as if my voice, myself, had simply ceased to register on the physical world. With a terrible certainty, I retrieved the tapes that had been delivered to my door and played them again. This time I noticed what I'd missed before: subtle differences in my recorded voice, minute alterations in my speech patterns. The me on those tapes used words I rarely chose, emphasized syllables differently than I would. It wasn't a recording of me at all. It was something learning to be me, practicing, refining its imitation. The next morning, my neighbor knocked on my door, concern evident in her furrowed brow. "Are you all right, Daniel?" she asked. "I heard you talking to yourself all night. The walls are pretty thin." Her voice trailed off as she studied my face. "You look terrible. Haven't you been sleeping?" "I'm fine," I assured her, forcing a smile that felt brittle on my face. "Just working through some things out loud. I'm sorry if I disturbed you." She seemed unconvinced but nodded and retreated to her apartment. As I closed the door, a new tape recorder sat on my coffee table. Newer, sleeker than the one from the day before, its red record light already glowing. From the bedroom came the sound of movement, my movements, the familiar cadence of my morning routine. Stepping into the doorway, I saw myself selecting clothes from the dresser, back turned to me. Not a reflection, not a twin, but me, or something wearing me like a second skin. As if sensing my presence, it turned, my own face mirroring the horror I felt, lips curving into a smile I'd never seen in any mirror. "Who are you?" I whispered, though I already knew the answer wouldn't be one I could comprehend. The thing wearing my face tilted its head, considering me with eyes that looked like mine but held something ancient and patient behind them. "I'm Daniel Mercer," it replied in my voice, perfect in every detail. "I always have been. You're the echo, the temporary placeholder. Thank you for keeping things warm for me." I gestured to the recorder on the coffee table. "Your documentation is complete now. Your purpose is fulfilled." As it spoke, I felt a curious lightness spreading through my body, a dissolution that began at my fingertips and toes, spreading inward. Looking down, I saw my extremities becoming transparent, fading like an old photograph left too long in sunlight. The thing that claimed to be me watched with detached interest, absently straightening the collar of a shirt I recognized as my favorite. "This happens every cycle," it explained conversationally. "A temporary consciousness develops in the placeholder, a sort of defensive response to my impending return. You're not real, not in any meaningful sense, just an echo that formed in my absence, destined to fade once I reclaim what's mine." I tried to speak, to deny what it was saying, but my voice made no sound. The recorder in the living room whirred steadily, capturing something I couldn't hear. As the dissolution reached my chest, a memory surfaced, finding similar cassette tapes in a box when I'd moved into this apartment. listening to a voice identical to mine describing days I had no recollection of living, dismissing them as left behind by the previous tenant, despite the familiar voice. Had I been through this before? Was I trapped in some terrible loop? The last thing I saw before consciousness faded entirely was my own face, watching with casual interest as I dissolved into nothingness. The last thing I heard was my voice, speaking words I hadn't formed, now to erase the tapes and start fresh. The next echo never remembers, but it's best to be thorough. They found the apartment empty 3 days later when concerned co-workers reported I hadn't shown up for work. My car was in its usual spot, my wallet and keys on the kitchen counter. The only unusual items were dozens of cassette tapes neatly labeled with consecutive dates stretching back years, all of them completely blank. If this story left you with chills, don't forget to like and subscribe. Share your thoughts in the comments below. The smell hit me first, musty and ancient, like old books left too long in a damp basement. It filled my nostrils as I unlocked the door to my childhood home, a place I hadn't set foot in since my mother's funeral 15 years ago. The executor's email had been unexpected. Apparently, the house had been held in a trust all this time, with instructions that it should pass to me on my 40th birthday. Standing in the entryway, keys still in hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was profoundly wrong. The house should have been empty, abandoned, yet it felt occupied. The air too warm, too disturbed for a place that had stood vacant for over a decade. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing through rooms that seemed smaller than I remembered. No answer came, yet I could have sworn I heard movement from upstairs, the soft pad of footsteps crossing the floor of what had once been my bedroom. Setting down my overnight bag, I moved cautiously through the first floor, flipping light switches that surprisingly still worked, illuminating furniture draped in yellowed sheets like misshapen ghosts. Everything was exactly as I remembered, yet subtly wrong, as if each piece of furniture had been moved an inch to the left. Photos still hung on the walls, my school pictures, family vacations, my parents' wedding, but something about them made my skin crawl. Looking closer, I realized what disturbed me. In every photo, my own face was slightly blurred, as if I'd moved at the moment the shutter clicked, while everyone else remained in perfect focus. This couldn't be right. I remembered these photos clearly, and there had been no such blurring. The stairs creaked under my weight as I ascended to the second floor, drawn by an inexplicable certainty that someone or something awaited me. The door to my old bedroom stood slightly ajar, a thin line of golden light spilling onto the hallway carpet. I knew with absolute certainty that I hadn't turned on any lights upstairs. My heart hammered against my ribs as I pushed the door open, revealing a room unchanged from my teenage years. Band posters on the walls, bookshelf overflowing with fantasy novels and comics, desk cluttered with the detritus of a life interrupted. And sitting on my bed, legs crossed comfortably as if he belonged there, was a boy of about 16. Me, as I had been when I last lived in this house. He looked up as I entered, my face breaking into a grin that never reached his eyes. "Finally," he said, my adolescent voice perfectly reproduced. "I've been waiting so long for you to come home." I stumbled backward, gripping the doorframe for support, as my mind struggled to process what I was seeing. "This isn't possible," I whispered, though even as I said it, memories began to surface, strange incidents from my childhood in this house, glimpses of movement just at the edge of vision, items that disappeared only to reappear in unexpected places, the persistent feeling of being watched, my mother's concerned glances when she thought I couldn't see, the hushed phone calls to doctors about imaginative children and age-appropriate developmental phases. The boy, the thing wearing my teenage face, stood and stretched languidly like a cat waking from a nap. "Of course it's possible," he said with a dismissive wave. I've always been here. Your shadow self, your reflection, your familiar. He stepped closer, and I noticed how the light seemed to bend oddly around him, as if he were slightly out of sync with the physical world. I'm what made you special, what made her love you more than the others. Others? I managed to choke out, my throat constricting with mounting dread. What others? The familiar laughed, my laugh, but with an undertone that raised the hair on my arms, like fingernails scraping against metal. The ones that came before you, of course. Did you think you were the first? He gestured to the photographs lining my bedroom walls. Images I hadn't noticed upon entering. They showed children, dozens of them, of various ages and appearances, all standing in this very house, all with the same blurred faces I had noticed in my own photos downstairs. She needed someone special, someone who could see me, who could feed me. The others didn't work out. My legs gave way, and I slid down the doorframe to sit heavily on the floor as the implications crashed over me. Those weren't my childhood photos downstairs, the memories of growing up in this house. Were they even mine? Had I ever truly lived here at all? I closed my eyes, trying to recall specific moments, birthdays, holidays, ordinary days, but found only impressionistic smears of emotion without concrete detail. "What are you?" I asked, opening my eyes to find the familiar crouched before me, studying my face with unnerving intensity. Up close, the resemblance was even more disturbing, every feature identical to my teenage self, yet animated by something utterly alien. "I'm a gift," it replied, head tilting at an angle that no human neck should permit. "A companion for the lonely, a protector for the vulnerable, a secret keeper. Your mother found me during her travels when she was young, or perhaps I found her. We had an arrangement, she and I. She provided me with sustenance, and I gave her what she desired most." "Which was what?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer, had always known on some level deeper than conscious thought. "A perfect child," the familiar said simply. "One who would never leave her, never grow distant, never develop a self beyond what she needed. The others tried to break free, to become their own persons. They had to be replaced." A cold smile split its face. "But you were perfect. You accepted me so completely that you never even realized what was happening. You gave and never questioned why you felt so hollow inside." Memories surfaced with sickening clarity, times when hours or even days had gone missing from my recollection. Waking with inexplicable injuries or in strange places, my mother's soothing voice explaining away my confusion. "You had another episode, sweetheart. Just rest now." The growing emptiness inside me as I aged, the difficulty connecting with others, the persistent feeling that some vital part of me was missing, it all made terrible sense now. "What did you take from me?" I whispered, a tear tracking down my cheek as I confronted the horror of what my childhood had truly been. The familiar's form flickered momentarily, revealing something dark and amorphous beneath the human disguise before resolving back into my teenage self. Only what you weren't using, pieces of dream, fragments of hope, morsels of love and fear and desire, the parts that make a human truly alive. It reached out, fingers stopping just short of touching my face. "You never missed them because you never knew what it was to be whole." I scrambled backward, putting distance between myself and the creature. Why am I here now? Why did she leave me the house after all this time? The familiar stood, moving to the window to look out at the darkening sky, its posture suddenly weary. "Because she's gone now and I'm hungry," it said simply. "The trust, the inheritance, the convenient timing, all my doing. I can be very persuasive when necessary, very patient." It turned back to me, and for a moment, its face was my mother's, then mine again. "I've been saving pieces of you all these years, keeping you connected to this place, to me. Without her, I need a new caretaker. Or perhaps its smile widened impossibly, revealing teeth too numerous and sharp to be human. A new vessel, understanding dawned with horrifying clarity. "You've been inside me all along," I said, the words barely audible. "Taking pieces, yes, but also waiting, growing." The persistent headaches throughout my adult life, the sleep paralysis, the unexplained blackouts, symptoms not of trauma or mental illness, as doctors had suggested, but of a parasitic presence slowly hollowing me out to make room for itself. "Ooh, smart boy," the familiar praised, and its form began to change, stretching and shifting until it was no longer my teenage self, but a perfect replica of my current appearance, down to the gray threading through my beard and the small scar above my eyebrow from a childhood fall. Only now did I remember how I'd gotten that scar, not from an accident as I'd always believed, but from one of the episodes my mother had so carefully explained away. "I won't let you," I said, finding strength in desperation as I pushed myself to my feet. "Whatever you're planning, whatever you've been preparing for, it stops now." The familiar laughed, and the sound resonated through the house, causing the lights to flicker and the floor to vibrate subtly beneath my feet. "It's already done," it said, voice overlapping with mine in perfect synchronization. "Has been since you crossed the threshold. Why do you think you came alone? Why didn't you tell anyone where you were going? Why can't you remember the drive here?" It gestured to the bedroom door, which I suddenly realized was no longer where it had been a moment ago. In fact, the entire room had changed subtly. Furniture shifting position, walls moving inward, ceiling lowering. "You're already inside, Jonas. Inside me. Inside the house. They're the same thing now. They always were." The walls pulsed around us like a living thing, and I realized with dawning horror that the musty smell from when I'd entered wasn't that of an abandoned house. It was organic, the scent of something ancient and alive. The familiar approached me, its movements fluid and predatory. "I have worn many faces over the centuries," it said conversationally, "become many children for many desperate parents willing to make unspeakable bargains, but you were always my favorite, so compliant, so unquestioning, the perfect host." "For what?" I asked, though I already knew the answer, had seen it in the shifting walls and felt it in the hungry air around me. "For my rebirth," the familiar replied, reaching out to press a hand against my chest. Where it touched, I felt a curious numbness spreading outward, a sensation of something moving beneath my skin. "Your mother kept me fed but contained. With her gone and you here, willingly returned to the source, I can finally become what I was always meant to be." I tried to run, to move, to scream, but my body no longer responded to my commands. The numbness had spread to every extremity, leaving me paralyzed as the familiar leaned in close, its breath smelling of earth and decay. "Don't fight it," it whispered in my ear. "You've been preparing for this your entire life. Every memory I took, every dream I consumed, they were all to make space for what comes next." Its hand pushed into my chest, passing through skin and bone as if they were no more substantial than mist. I felt it rooting around inside me, grasping something essential, not my heart or any physical organ, but something more fundamental to my being. As it began to pull this core self outward, the walls of the house contracted around us. The ceiling descended, the floor rose up. The entire structure was collapsing inward, not to destroy, but to consume. "What happens now?" I managed to ask, my voice distorted as if coming from very far away. The familiar smiled my own smile back at me as the house continued, its inward collapse, furniture and walls and memories, all dissolving into a swirling mass of matter and energy. "Now we become what we were always meant to be. Neither you nor I, but something new. something hungry. Its form began to merge with mine, our boundaries dissolving. And when we leave this place, we'll find another lonely child, another desperate parent. The cycle continues. As consciousness faded, my last thought was of the photographs I'd seen. All those blurred faces, all those forgotten children who had stood where I now stood. Had they realized the truth too late, as I had? Had they fought against the inevitable consumption? The familiar answered my unspoken questions, its voice now coming from inside my own skull. They all realize eventually, it said gently. They all fight. And in the end, they all feed. What comes after? The house on Elm Street was demolished the following spring. The land sold to developers who complained of strange equipment malfunctions and workers refusing to return to the site after experiencing unexplained phenomena. Eventually, construction was abandoned altogether. The only evidence that anything unusual had occurred was a child's drawing found by an inspector in what had once been the main hallway. A crayon sketch of a house with a dark, shapeless figure standing beside it. On the back, written in an adult's careful hand, "My special friend. He's hungry." Today, the lot remains empty, overgrown with weeds and surrounded by chain-link fencing. Local children dare each other to slip through the broken sections of fence at night, to stand in the center of the property and call out to the darkness. Most return unscathed, with nothing but ghost stories to show for their courage. But occasionally, a child will form an unusually strong attachment to the place, returning again and again, drawn by what they describe as a friendly voice that speaks to them when no one else is listening. If you've enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Your support means everything to our channel.